The winter wind bit through her threadbare coat, but Sarah Donovan barely noticed. Strolling past neon-lit windows, she couldn't ignore the relentless ache in her belly, an ache caused by hunger and the 6-month child she carried. Shivering on the sidewalk, she glanced up at a massive TV screen, blaring the nightly financial news. There, beaming under the bright studio lights, was a man she once promised to love forever. William Donovan, her husband, a multimillionaire, famous, admired, while she trembled in the cold. Her heart twisted. How had their world turned so cruel? She had nothing, and he seemed to have it all. Sarah Donovan had known hunger before, but never like this. On that frigid evening, the wind seemed to slice through layers of her clothing directly into her bones. She pulled the sides of her coat together in a desperate attempt to keep warm. Through the swirling snowflakes, she could just make out the bright flashing monitors in Times Square. On the largest screen, a familiar face, William Donovan, appeared. His name scrolled in large letters. Tech Investor of the Year. Applause thundered behind him in the recorded clip. Brightly lit, he was addressing a hall filled with wealth power and cameras from CNN, CNBC, and local networks. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. That face, the strong jaw, the slight smile that once reassured her everything would be all right. Now he looked polished, exuding confidence. She hadn't seen him in person for almost a year. Her chest clenched with memories of the day he walked out, arguments about money and ambition overshadowing their love. She'd tried to reason with him to support him, but each conversation ended in a new fight, culminating in the shocking decision he would succeed alone. The flickering billboard cut to a montage of images, William shaking hands with Mark Cuban at a tech conference, then introducing a pioneering piece of software in Silicon Valley. Sarah saw glimpses of glamorous parties William in a tailored tuxedo, accompanied by men and women she had never met. The talk show host concluded the segment by proclaiming, "William Donovan, America's newest business sensation." Then the screen blinked to a car commercial. Just like that, he vanished into the night. Sarah blinked back tears. There was a time William's arms had been her warm refuge, promising they'd face every storm side by side. And now, pregnant with his child, she walked alone on icy sidewalks, scrounging for a place to sleep. She was determined not to cry, but her emotions overwhelmed her as she gazed up at the ironically beautiful Christmas lights decorating the city. By all appearances, the world around her was celebrating, and she was surviving. Barely. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, feeling the slightest kick. "I'll take care of you," she whispered to the life inside her. It was a promise she intended to keep, though at that moment she wasn't sure how. When she turned away from the screen and stumbled onward, her foot snagged on a piece of broken pavement. A stinging pain shot through her ankle, and she nearly collapsed. She bit down a cry, scanning the crowd for help, but passers-by, preoccupied with their own rush of errands and holiday shopping, scarcely gave her a glance. That's what life had become after she left the small studio in which she and William once lived, alone, invisible. Sarah's pride was bruised, but she refused to crumble. She passed by a bakery. Through the window, the smell of fresh bread made her stomach twist. She had to preserve her last dollar for the cheapest motel, a place with peeling wallpaper and barely functioning plumbing, but at least it was indoors. She stepped inside, bought a small roll and devoured it in 3 bites. Outside again, the wind roared, intensifying the city's clamor. Still clutching her abdomen, she decided that tomorrow everything had to change. She would find a job. She'd scour the city for help. She would not let her child enter this world with nothing but sorrow. But for tonight, she needed a place to rest, a place that wasn't some abandoned corner or shadowed alley. Even if it cost her last few dollars, she had to prioritize the safety of the life inside her. As Sarah walked away from the mesmerizing screens of Times Square, one thought pulsed in her mind. Her husband, the man she had once loved beyond reason, was thriving. And here she was pregnant and alone. Could the chasm between them grow any wider? Long before he was the darling of business magazines and tech summits, William Donovan was a daydreamer writing code in the corner of the local university library. Sarah remembered the first time she saw him. It was her sophomore year, and she was majoring in English literature at Columbia. The library's back table had been her favorite spot, quiet, perfect for reading. She noticed him a junior in computer science, leaning over a laptop with an exasperated scowl. Curious and drawn by the intellectual frenzy in his eyes, she'd asked, "Need any help?" Although Sarah barely understood advanced programming, the question sparked the first real conversation they ever had. William's exhausted face broke into the shyest of smiles, and she recalled thinking, "He's kind of cute under all that stress." They chatted about his class project, an algorithm for data compression. Sarah confessed she was more comfortable discussing Shakespeare than software, and he teased her gently. From that moment on, they were a constant presence in each other's lives. Their connection seemed effortless. He awakened her interest in technology's potential. She introduced him to literary classics, weaving in metaphors about love and ambition. They started dating by Christmas break of that year, with sweet, simple moments, late-night walks around campus, scrounging for cheap coffee in the student lounge, trying out new ramen spots around Manhattan. They were two dreamers, William longing to found a tech startup that would revolutionize how people shared data, and Sarah hoping to become a novelist. The future seemed limitless. She could still feel the way he used to grasp her hand whenever she doubted herself, as if to say, "We'll get through anything." Yet as graduation approached, financial stresses haunted them. William, determined to compete in the tech world, pitched his software to small investors, but faced constant rejection. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled to get traction for her short stories, or even land a decent internship. Their families offered little financial support. William's parents, proud owners of a modest real estate business in upstate New York, expected him to follow a more traditional path and often expressed skepticism toward his entrepreneurial obsession. Sarah's mother, whose chronic illness drained the family's savings, couldn't help beyond a few encouraging phone calls. When they got married in a humble civil ceremony right after graduation, they were brimming with hope. Their honeymoon was a short weekend, spent in a budget motel near Niagara Falls, the only getaway they could afford. But they didn't care. What mattered was their shared devotion. They returned to New York City, renting a cheap studio apartment in Queens. William coded into the late hours, while Sarah worked as a barista by day and scribbled short stories by night. Their love burned like a bright flame until cracks began to form. William became consumed with success, obsessed, really. Each failed pitch to an investor sent him into a silent downward spiral that led to outbursts. Sarah tried to reassure him that failure was part of the journey, but her optimism only irritated him. As months dragged on, the bills piled up. William grew desperate, dabbling in risky deals with shady angel investors. They had endless arguments about money. When success finally arrived nearly 2 years into their marriage, with a major investor, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, buying into William's new software idea, Sarah hoped that would ease the tension. But ironically, it only magnified their differences. William was suddenly thrust into corporate meetings, traveling across the country, networking with high-profile entrepreneurs. Invitations to flashy events replaced their quiet dinners. He no longer came home with cheap takeout. He was gone most nights, presumably in boardrooms or at fancy parties. Sarah felt him slipping away. A year passed in that swirl of success, and Sarah was left behind, often alone, in their now upscale condo near Central Park. William's time was devoured by business calls and conferences on the West Coast. When he was home, he was distracted, fidgety, unwilling to share stories of his day. She remembered their final argument vividly. She'd asked him to spend one evening with her to reconnect. He retorted that she had no clue how hard he worked to keep them afloat, how she should be more grateful. That night ended with William storming out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. He never came back. Days became weeks. Sarah's calls and texts went unanswered. Soon bank notices arrived explaining how William had switched all joint accounts to his name alone. Sarah had no income. Worse yet, 2 months later, she discovered she was pregnant. Fear overrode any bitterness, but desperation set in. Rent soared, her barista job didn't pay enough, and she could no longer afford the condo. Before long, she was forced onto the street. She tried contacting William's PR office, but the line always went to a polite assistant who left her on hold until she hung up in frustration. Now, witnessing his face on the giant screen in Times Square, that entire whirlwind of a past threatened to engulf her. She reminded herself of one vow she'd made, standing in that battered apartment with an eviction notice in hand. I will survive and protect this child. If the father refused to care, she would find a way. She would not become just another nameless tragedy in the city's underbelly. Morning brought little relief from the cold. Sarah woke on a narrow, squeaky bed in the cheapest motel she could find. The heater rattled uselessly, barely keeping the air above freezing. She had about $15, left enough for a couple of cheap sandwiches, maybe bus fare if she wanted to head to the next shelter. But Sarah was stubborn. She believed there had to be something better. She packed her meager belongings, a change of clothes, her worn copy of Emily Dickinson's poems, a phone with a cracked screen that almost never picked up a signal. Everything fit into a single bag. Every step outside felt like walking through a wind tunnel. She knew she had to find help soon. A pregnant woman living on the streets was a tragedy waiting to happen. She headed to the nearest public library, an older building with classical columns, seeking warmth and free internet to look for job openings. Inside, near the community bulletin board, she found a flyer advertising a free women's shelter in Brooklyn. It promised hot meals counseling and prenatal support. She tore off the address tab. This might be my best chance, she thought, shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time in days. She hopped on a bus, ignoring the pitying looks from a couple of other passengers. Upon arrival, she found the shelter nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The building was large, with peeling paint and sagging steps, but the warmth she felt when she walked inside was immediate and comforting. A friendly volunteer named Rebecca greeted her with a kind smile. After scribbling her name on a form, Sarah was shown to a cramped but clean room shared with 3 other women. Each cot had fresh blankets and a small side table. Meals are served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening, Rebecca explained. We also have prenatal checkups every Friday with a visiting nurse from Bellevue Hospital. Sarah nearly cried with relief. A medical checkup was a blessing. She hadn't seen a doctor since learning of her pregnancy. Rebecca chatted with her for a while, asking about her situation. Though Sarah felt hesitant to reveal too much, There was something about Rebecca's gentle nature that encouraged honesty. She admitted her husband had left, that he was well off, and that she had nowhere else to go. Rebecca listened, never judging, then simply patted Sarah's shoulder. "You'll be safe here. You'll get back on your feet." "I'm here if you need anything," Rebecca offered. Those words of encouragement did more for Sarah's spirit than anything had in months. That first night in the shelter, Sarah lay in the dark, hearing the muffled snores of her roommates. She felt a faint flutter within her baby moving. "I'm not alone," she reminded herself. This life inside her gave her purpose. She recalled an old Emily Dickinson line. She loved something about hope being a thing with feathers. That hope had perched in her soul, refusing to abandon her even in life's darkest corners. The next morning she joined the breakfast queue. The food wasn't luxurious oatmeal, a banana-powdered orange juice, but it was warm and nourishing. Some of the residents eyed her suspiciously. They were all at different points in life's struggles, yet in their gazes, Sarah sensed a silent camaraderie that had been missing in her life for so long. As she sat down to eat, Rebecca joined her. "We have a job support program," Rebecca said, her voice quiet. "You'd get help writing a resume, searching for openings, maybe training. I know it can be tough to find something with no stable address, but we can try." Sarah nodded eagerly. "That would be great," she replied, swallowing a surge of gratitude. She was ready to do anything office cleaning retail, anything that would help her earn enough for a deposit on a small apartment. But as she scrolled through job listings later that day, a rerun of a business show played on the shelter's TV in the lounge. They were discussing William Donovan again. A celebrity investor, Mark Cuban, had praised William's entrepreneurial drive, suggesting he was the future of American tech. Hearing the news anchor casually mention her husband's name felt like a punch to the gut. He was more successful than she'd even imagined. She took a deep breath, forced herself to look away from the screen, and told herself, "This is my life now, and I'm not giving up." She wasn't sure if she hated him, missed him, or simply wished none of this had happened. All she knew was that she had to survive, and she would on her own terms. At precisely 9 in the morning the following Friday, Sarah waited in a makeshift exam room set up in the shelter's converted rec hall. Worn curtains partitioned the space. The volunteer nurse, Ms. Francis, bustled in, setting down a bag of medical supplies. She was a short, no-nonsense woman with bright, reassuring eyes. "How are you feeling, dear?" Ms. Francis asked, washing her hands and snapping on latex gloves. Sarah hesitated. She had been ignoring the dull ache in her lower back, the bouts of nausea that still came and went, and the constant exhaustion. "Better now that I have a safe place to sleep," she admitted. Ms. Francis nodded, taking Sarah's vitals, measuring her belly, and listening carefully with a Doppler for the baby's heartbeat. The rhythmic whoosh whoosh filled the air, and Sarah's eyes grew misty. This was the first time she'd heard her child's heartbeat. So strong, she thought, pressing a hand to her mouth. "No major concerns right now?" Ms. Francis informed, giving a small smile. "But you need to be mindful of your diet. Get as much protein and healthy foods as you can. And rest. Stress can harm the baby too." Sarah almost laughed bitterly. Stress was the only thing she had in abundance. But she forced a bright nod. Ms. Francis noted that Sarah would need a formal medical file at a hospital soon in case of early labor or complications. "We'll coordinate that," Ms. Francis added. "In the meantime, do you have any support person for prenatal care? A family member or—" her voice trailed. "My husband's not around," Sarah said, swallowing a lump in her throat. "No other family in the city." The nurse's expression turned sympathetic. Well, you're not alone. We're here to help. After the checkup, Sarah felt slightly more confident. The baby was healthy. That knowledge was the anchor she clung to. She spent her afternoons in the job support program, brushing up her typing skills, practicing interview responses with a counselor named Janet. Her English degree helped. She applied for positions as a receptionist, an editorial assistant, or even a part-time tutor. Most responses came back negative. Employers didn't want someone with an unstable address, or they required advanced certifications. But Sarah persevered. Days turned into weeks. The bulge in her belly became more pronounced, and so did the heaviness in her heart. She tried to keep track of the outside world, scanning newspapers in the library for job ads, occasionally glimpsing headlines about William Donovan's skyrocketing success. One day the paper featured a photograph of him leaving a high-end restaurant with a tall, elegant woman wearing designer clothes. The photo caption labeled her as Madeline Ashford, potential new business partner. Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced at her own reflection in the library window. Rumpled coat eyes ringed with fatigue. If William had moved on personally, was she even a memory? That evening her back pains grew sharper, and she realized with dread that her pregnancy was entering a stage where she would soon need consistent medical care. She couldn't keep skipping checkups or rely solely on the shelter nurse. She also worried about finances, diapers, baby clothes, a crib. Where would she get them? She'd joined a waiting list for government assistance, but bureaucracy moved at a snail's pace. Sarah found herself weeping some nights, the future an ominous shadow. Yet each morning she recalled the baby's heartbeat, reminding herself there was no choice but forward. One particularly cold day, she forced herself to walk 3 miles in the slushy streets to follow up on a potential receptionist position. She arrived soaked and shivering. Her hopes rose when the manager, a kindly older woman, offered a temporary role answering phones at a small publishing company. The pay was minimal, but it was something. She'd start Monday. Sarah left the office hugging a folder of paperwork and feeling a glimmer of pride. I'm making progress. When she returned to the shelter, though, she found Rebecca pale-faced in the hallway. We need to talk, Rebecca said quietly, leading Sarah to a corner. Apparently an acquaintance of Sarah's had come by looking for her, a man with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit. He left a business card that read, Donovan Enterprises. Sarah's heart hammered. She stared at the card, the swirling black and gold letters. Did he say anything she managed to ask? Just that he needed to speak with you regarding a personal matter. Sarah's mind whirled. Could it be William's lawyer? One of his personal aides? Did William know she was pregnant? She never thought he would actually search for her. A swirl of anger, fear, and a strange residual hope filled her. She resolved to call the number. Maybe it was finally time for a confrontation, a reckoning. She just didn't know what to expect. Sarah picked up a battered pay-as-you-go phone, a small victory from the shelter's resource program, and stared at the business card. It bore a name, Charles Whitmore, Legal Counsel. She dialed with trembling fingers, listening to the ring on the other end. Anxiety swelled. Finally, a crisp male voice answered. Charles Whitmore speaking. This is Sarah Donovan. You left your card at the shelter. Her voice sounded small. He cleared his throat. Ah, Mrs. Donovan. I'm glad you reached out. Mr. Donovan, your husband would like to set up a meeting. It's in regard to finances and certain changes to his estate. A chill ran down her spine. Was this about a divorce? She almost panicked at the thought, but she maintained composure. "Why now?" she asked. The question came out bitterly. "Ma'am, I only have instructions to coordinate your meeting. Could you come by the Donovan Enterprises office downtown on Fifth Avenue?" Sarah hesitated. "I can't. Not immediately." She had a job orientation. Soon she had no decent clothes and no money for a taxi. "Shall we say next Tuesday at noon?" he pressed. "We'd be happy to reimburse your transportation. Mr. Donovan understands how difficult the city can be. He specifically requested you meet in a neutral setting." Sarah's anger flared at the paternalistic tone, but caution prevailed. "All right. Tuesday." She hung up, heart thudding. William wants to meet. Part of her raged that he would drag her into some legal affair after all this time. Another part, small yet insistent, felt relief that maybe he would acknowledge their baby. Maybe do the right thing. And at least provide child support. Tuesday came quickly, and Sarah found herself rummaging through the shelter's donated clothing closet, picking out a modest black dress and a coat that fit snugly over her belly. Rebecca offered to do her hair in a simple bun. As she left, 6 women in the shelter wished her luck, though they knew only that she was meeting her ex. The Donovan Enterprises office towered over Fifth Avenue with mirrored glass windows. Sarah approached it anxiously, ignoring the doorman's raised eyebrow when she walked in. The marble-floored lobby gleamed, and well-dressed professionals hurried past, exuding an air of wealth. A statue of William's trademark D logo was on display near the elevators, a testament to his success. Charles Whitmore, a tall, slim man with graying hair, emerged from behind the reception area and greeted her with a polite bow. "Mrs. Donovan." "Right this way," he said, leading her to a plush conference room overlooking the city skyline. Soft leather chairs, a polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Central Park. Everything screamed opulence. She perched on a chair, feeling out of place. Moments later, the door opened. In walked William Donovan. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and stepped forward with a hesitant smile. Sarah's throat constricted at the sight of him. He looked the same, yet different, older, more confident. She stood instinctively, placing a protective hand on her abdomen. If he noticed her rounded belly, he didn't show any immediate reaction. "Sarah," he said quietly, as though testing the word. He paused, his eyes flicking to her stomach, then back to her face. "Thank you for coming. I didn't realize you were, are you?" She inhaled sharply. "Pregnant," she finished. "Yes. For nearly 6 months." A fleeting expression of shock, maybe guilt, flashed in his eyes. "I didn't know," he said. You didn't tell me." Anger boiled in her. "I tried. You cut all contact. You walked out. And..." Her voice trembled. She clenched her fists. "You were too busy with your empire to pick up the phone." He exhaled, looking pained. "I'm sorry. I truly am." He sank into the chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. "I messed up. I realize that now. I've been going through a lot, but it's no excuse." She eyed him warily, uncertain if this was genuine remorse or a performance. "So why am I here?" "Did you need me to sign divorce papers? Is that it?" William shook his head vigorously. No. That's not it at all." He looked at Charles, who stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Donovan asked me to assist in drafting an arrangement to provide you with financial support, enough to cover all prenatal care, childbirth expenses, and living costs. In addition, there's a trust fund he'd like to establish for the child. Sarah felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that there was some practical solution, indignation that he thought money alone could fix everything, and a flicker of hope. "What about us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Our marriage?" William gazed at her, eyes clouded. "I want to help you. And our child. I know I can't change the past, but I can at least do right by you now." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "As for us, Sarah, I can't pretend I haven't caused terrible damage. I don't expect you to forgive me instantly." But maybe with time, she wasn't sure how to respond. It felt like they were strangers. She realized she was trembling. He's acknowledging the child, she told herself. That was step one. Charles laid out documents referencing monthly allowances, coverage for medical bills, etc. The amounts were staggering. Sarah had never seen such figures. She could live comfortably, rent an apartment, and never worry about basic needs again. But guilt gnawed at her. Should she accept this? She eyed William, her voice wavering. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not?" Before William's face was taut. "When I saw you disappeared from our condo and heard rumors you were struggling, I tried to locate you, but I was overwhelmed with expansions, new deals, then the pandemic of responsibilities. I kept putting it off." He inhaled, pained. "That was wrong. I realized I couldn't move forward, knowing you might be suffering. You deserved better." "Damn right I did," Sarah muttered, tears burning her eyes. She glanced at the legal documents. They were a band-aid solution. Maybe it was an answer for the baby. Yet a single question lingered. Could William Donovan possibly be part of my life again? She didn't sign anything that day, telling Charles she needed time to think. William offered to call her a car, but she declined, wanting to walk back to the shelter to clear her head. He handed her a card with his personal cell number, the only item that felt remotely intimate. She left the grand building uncertain whether she was stepping toward salvation or heartbreak. That evening, Sarah returned to the shelter in a daze. She found Rebecca in the kitchen, dishing out bowls of soup to the residents. Feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her, Sarah pulled Rebecca aside and recounted the surreal encounter with William Donovan. She showed her the paperwork, baffling sums of money that could turn her life around. "That's... wow," Rebecca breathed, flipping through the pages. "I've never seen so many zeros on a support agreement." She paused. "So what are you going to do?" Sarah sighed, sinking into a chair. "I don't know. Part of me feels like taking this money is the only logical choice. The baby deserves a stable life, not a mother stuck in a shelter. But another part," she rubbed her belly. "I'm scared he's just trying to buy off his conscience. If I sign, do I lose my dignity?" Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "It's not about dignity, Sarah. It's about providing for your child and yourself. You've sacrificed so much. You deserve some security. That doesn't mean you have to let him back in your life unless you want to." Those words calmed Sarah slightly, but her mind remained unsettled. She recalled her once blazing love with William, how they'd giggle over cheap pizza late at night, how she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder while he read his code aloud. Is that man still in there, beneath the polished millionaire facade, she wondered. A part of her yearned for closure or even a chance at reconciliation. But the hurt was fresh, the betrayal still raw. The baby's well-being, however, was paramount. That same night, she carefully reviewed the documents, scribbling notes and questions in the margins. wanting to ensure she wasn't signing away any rights inadvertently. If William was sincere in his remorse, maybe she could start by accepting financial support, then see if anything else could be salvaged later. She set the papers aside, resolved to meet with Charles again in a few days. Meanwhile, Sarah's new part-time receptionist job started. She commuted by bus, then hopped the subway to a modest building in Midtown, stepping into the small publishing house. The environment was busy, yet casual stacks of manuscripts, coffee mugs on every desk, editors arguing about grammar. On her first day, she answered phones, directed visitors, and fetched coffee for staff meetings. By lunchtime, she was exhausted, but a gentle wave of triumph swelled inside her. "I'm working. I'm making strides." During a brief break, she scrolled her phone and saw a new message from William. "Please let me know if you have any questions about the agreement. Also, I hope you're doing well." That was all. So formal, yet tinged with a cautious warmth. Sarah stared at the screen, unsure how to reply, eventually typing a short, "I'm still thinking. I'm safe. Thanks." She pressed send. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to focus on her tasks. Over the following week, she gradually came to a decision. She agreed to sign the financial support arrangement, but made it clear to Charles Whitmore in an email that she didn't want William controlling her life. She insisted on having her own apartment in her own name, a modest but comfortable place near the shelter, so she could remain in the supportive environment until she felt truly stable. She also wanted the freedom to make medical and personal decisions for the baby. If William truly wanted to be involved, they could discuss visitation and co-parenting later. To her astonishment, William agreed to all of it, no arguments. He forwarded a preliminary lease for a small 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, the rent fully paid for a year. Sarah felt a surge of relief. He's taking responsibility, she thought. Maybe there was a shred of the old William left. But was she ready for more than just a transactional arrangement? Late one night, cradling the phone, she impulsively dialed his personal number. He picked up immediately, sounding anxious. "Sarah." She swallowed. "I just wanted to say thank you," she managed, "for the help." Silence filled the line, then a soft exhale. "Of course. It's the least I can do." Her voice trembled. "This baby, William, it's ours. He or she deserves 2 parents who at least respect each other." He murmured, "I'd like that. I'd like to earn your respect again. And maybe one day, your forgiveness." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She remembered how once, years ago, they could share entire nights, simply talking, dreaming. She had so many questions for him, why he abandoned her, what truly motivated his success, whether there was any love left. But for now, she whispered, "Good night, William," and ended the call. By the time Sarah was entering her 7th month of pregnancy, her life looked drastically different. With William's financial support, she moved into the small but cozy apartment. The walls were painted a cheerful cream color, and there was an extra room she planned to turn into a nursery. The furniture was minimal, just a sofa, a bed, and a kitchen table, but it was hers. Her name was on the lease. Her job at the publishing house had also become slightly more secure. The manager recognized her punctuality and diligence. They offered her an extended contract for another 3 months. With the baby coming, Sarah wasn't sure how long she could keep working, but at least she had some sense of purpose each day. She'd found a routine that made her feel human again. Wake up, check on emails, go to work, come home. Set aside half an hour to jot down story ideas and then rest. She still visited the shelter occasionally, volunteering to help with new arrivals, offering them a spark of hope in the same way Rebecca had done for her. One chilly afternoon, Sarah heard a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find William standing there, holding a small bouquet of lilies and a bag of groceries. Her heart pounded as she took in his hesitant smile. "I was in the neighborhood," he explained. "Thought I'd stop by, if that's okay." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told him her exact address, Charles must have. She had been careful with boundaries, not wanting to feel controlled, but she found herself nodding, stepping aside to let him in. He handed her the flowers, which she placed in a vase on the kitchen table. "I brought some things," he said, lifting the grocery bag. "Fresh fruit, vitamins, and a new jacket for you. The weather's getting colder." The gesture caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed, smoothing her hand over her growing belly. His eyes flicked to the apartment, taking in the bare walls and modest furnishings. "It's nice, cozy," he remarked, trying to fill the silence. He glanced at her abdomen again, then back at her face. "May I ask, do you know the baby's gender?" She shook her head. "I want it to be a surprise," she said softly. "That's wonderful." William looked down, fiddling with the bag. Finally, he exhaled. "Sarah, I know showing up like this might be too forward. I'm trying to respect your space, but I'd also like to be more involved. I want to help with the doctor appointments, the nursery, anything you need." She studied him, noticing a sincerity in his gaze that hadn't been there during their last tumultuous months together. Why the sudden change, she asked. She recalled the humiliating nights she spent on the streets, clinging to her coat for warmth, while he mingled with venture capitalists. William's shoulders sagged. "When I left, I was consumed by my ambition, believing I couldn't handle a relationship. I was terrified of failing. I did fail you in the worst way. Then once success arrived, I felt emptier than ever. All I had was money, status, and a hollow sense of accomplishment." He paused, voice raw. "I realize now that none of it matters, without love, without people who truly care about you. I guess I'm trying to atone for that. I can't change the past, but I can try to be here now." Tears prickled Sarah's eyes. The sincerity in his voice shook her. "I appreciate the honesty," she said slowly. She wondered if it was real or if guilt simply propelled him now that she was visibly pregnant and vulnerable. Yet a part of her, the part that remembered how they'd once dreamed side by side, wanted to believe him. "Would you like some tea?" she offered, gesturing to the kettle on the stove. He nodded gratefully. The two of them settled at the tiny kitchen table, sipping tea amidst the silence. The city traffic hummed outside. Neither knew how to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage in one afternoon, but at least they were there, trying. After a while, William cleared his throat. "I'd like to take you to your next prenatal appointment," he said. "If you'll let me. I can drive or we can get a car. Whatever you prefer." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That would be nice." Deep down, a small flicker of warmth lit her heart, something akin to hope. William accompanied Sarah to her next prenatal appointment at Bellevue Hospital. Miss Francis, the shelter nurse who volunteered there, greeted them warmly, but Sarah noticed the curious glances from staff members. She imagined they recognized William. His face was plastered across business headlines. Yet to his credit, he didn't flaunt his status. He simply held Sarah's coat while she changed into a gown and asked the doctor thoughtful questions about the baby's development. They heard the baby's heartbeat again, steady and reassuring. William's expression softened, and Sarah saw tears in his eyes. A powerful wave of emotion struck her. It was the first tangible moment she realized he truly cared about the child. On their way out, he placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her through the bustling hallway. She allowed the small gesture, longing for closeness, yet keeping her guard up. In the hospital lobby, they unexpectedly bumped into a familiar face, Barbara Donovan Williams' mother. Her short silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a designer coat. She froze upon spotting her son with Sarah. "William," she exclaimed. Then her gaze flicked to Sarah's round belly, and her eyes narrowed. "I heard rumors, but I thought you two were done." Sarah instinctively braced herself. She recalled the tension with her mother-in-law, who never quite warmed to her. Barbara had always found subtle ways to criticize Sarah's family background and modest means. She also blamed Sarah for distracting William from more important ambitions. William squared his shoulders. "Mother, this is Sarah. My wife. She's pregnant with our child." Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. "So you're reconciling?" she asked, voice laced with disapproval. Sarah couldn't hold back. "I wouldn't call it that," she said quietly. "We're trying to figure things out, at least for the baby's sake." Barbara sniffed disdainfully. "William, you have far too many responsibilities to let old mistakes drag you down." She eyed Sarah as if she were an intruder. "Why didn't you tell him you were pregnant sooner?" A flame of anger rose in Sarah. "I tried. He left, and I had no way to reach him. And trust me, I wouldn't call carrying your grandchild a mistake." William gently took his mother's arm. "Enough, Mother. The baby is my responsibility, and I won't have you speak to Sarah that way. We're not discussing this here in a hospital lobby." Barbara sniffed again. "We'll talk later, William." She glared at Sarah with thinly veiled contempt, then turned on her heel and walked away. Heart-pounding, Sarah noticed people staring. She blinked back, tears, humiliated by the confrontation. William's jaw was tight. "I'm sorry. She had no right to talk to you like that," he said softly. But Sarah's mind raced. She recalled how Barbara had once told her she wasn't good enough for William, that he needed a partner more on his level. Now wealthy and successful, William's family clearly saw Sarah as an obstacle. "It's fine," she muttered, though her trembling hands said otherwise. "I'll manage." They walked outside, the crisp air hitting their faces. William turned to her. "Please don't let her get to you. She doesn't speak for me." Sarah found her resolve. "I won't. But if we're going to co-parent, I need to know you'll stand by me, not be swayed by your mother's opinions." He nodded, eyes earnest. "I promise." Though his promise felt genuine, Sarah couldn't ignore the chill left by the confrontation. She remembered the nights when William's mother belittled her for dreaming of being a writer, for lacking financial security. Would that negativity poison their child's life too? Or had William grown enough to shield his new family from it? Only time would tell. On the drive back to Sarah's apartment, the tension was palpable. William tried to make small talk about the baby's due date, about nursery decor. But Sarah was lost in her thoughts. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted quietly, "My mother was always controlling. Part of why I left was because I felt suffocated by her expectations, by the pressure of success. I let that overshadow you and me. I'm sorry." Sarah clutched her seatbelt. "What's done is done," she said, voice steady. "Let's just focus on the future, on doing right by this baby. That's all that matters. Inside, though, her emotions churned. Could we really have a future together? She wondered. Or is it just going to be co-parenting with a man I once loved? At her apartment, he walked her to the door. "Call me if you need anything," he said softly. She nodded, uncertain if she'd ever be ready to let him fully back into her life. The final weeks of Sarah's pregnancy arrived with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Her belly felt enormous, every movement an effort. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a blend of excitement and anxiety about the impending birth. William visited regularly, bringing supplies, maternity clothes, organic food, baby items. They spoke about practicalities, pediatricians, childcare options, possible names. Yet the question of their relationship remained unresolved. At times, they fell into an unexpected closeness, sharing a laugh at a tiny onesie with silly prints reminiscing about their college days. In those moments, Sarah glimpsed the man she fell in love with, his eyes warm and tender. But the memory of abandonment always lurked. She couldn't easily forget sleeping on sidewalks, shivering in the winter cold, all while he soared to stardom. Trust would not be rebuilt overnight. One evening she typed away at a short story, her old passion for writing rekindling, when a gentle knock came at the door. She opened it to find William in casual clothes holding a large container of homemade soup. "You mentioned in passing that you craved chicken soup," he said, smiling sheepishly. "I asked my personal chef to make a batch." "Don't worry, I didn't cook it myself. That would be disastrous." Sarah's laughter slipped out before she could stop it. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He set the container down, noticing her manuscript drafts scattered across the table. "Are you writing again?" She blushed, nodding. "Just trying to get the creative juices flowing. Something for me, you know, to find myself again." He asked if he could read a snippet. She hesitated, then allowed him. He read quietly, eyes darting across the page. When he finished, he looked up, an admiring expression on his face. "This is really good," he said softly. "I forgot how talented you are." She swallowed, her heart fluttering. He was praising her, not dismissing her efforts as frivolous, like he once had. "Thank you," she whispered. They talked about the story about a lone traveler who finds hope in unexpected places. The conversation flowed naturally, reminiscent of their younger selves. At one point, he gently placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. A shared smile passed between them, something both tender and uncertain. Later that night, as he left, she lingered at the door. "William," she said softly, "I just want you to know. I see you trying. I appreciate it." He exhaled, relief washing over his face. "I'll keep trying, Sarah." But the next day, chaos returned. William called her in a panic, asking her to watch the news. Another business scandal had broken out, accusations that Donovan Enterprises engaged in questionable stock trading. Rumors swirled that William's mother, Barbara, had been pulling strings behind the scenes, orchestrating backdoor deals. William's name was splashed across headlines with tabloids, speculating about the moral integrity of his entire operation. Sarah flipped on her old TV set, seeing reporters swarm in front of Donovan Enterprises. A few sensationalist channels displayed a picture of Sarah from months ago, claiming she was the estranged wife, carrying the heir to a troubled empire. She felt nauseous. Was she about to be dragged into the public eye? William texted, "I'm sorry. This is out of control. I never wanted you to be involved." She fought the urge to panic, but the stress weighed heavily, and within hours, mild contractions started. She was only 36 weeks along, a bit early, but still within a safe range. The contractions weren't severe yet, but she felt them enough to know her body might be preparing for labor. She called Miss Francis, who advised her to rest and hydrate, warning her to come to the hospital if things intensified. Night descended, and the tabloids kept spewing stories. A photo of Barbara, stern-faced, refused to speak to reporters. They insinuated that William's entire fortune could be at risk. Sarah tried not to care about money, but she worried about the baby. If Donovan Enterprises collapsed under scandal, would her child be caught in the crossfire of a messy public fiasco? When William arrived at her apartment, he looked drained, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry for the media circus," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea my mother was involved in shady trades. I've fired the people responsible, but the damage is done." Sarah tried to remain calm, but the Braxton Hicks contractions flared, causing her to wince. William noticed immediately fear flashing across his features. "Are you okay? I think—" She paused, breathing through the discomfort. "I might be in early labor." His face paled, and in that moment, all talk of scandal and business melted away. "Let's get you to the hospital," he said gently, helping her gather her things. As they hurried out, Sarah realized a new chapter was beginning. Whatever storms raged outside, she was about to bring a child into the world, and she needed William's unwavering support. Inside the maternity wing at Bellevue Hospital, time seemed to slip into a blur of fluorescent lights, medical chatter, and waves of pain. Sarah was admitted with mild contractions that by midnight turned fierce. William stayed by her side, gripping her hand through each surge. Sweating and trembling, Sarah alternated between tears and focused breathing, clinging to the promise that soon she'd hold her baby. It was a tumultuous night. At one point, the baby's heart rate dipped slightly, prompting quick action from the medical staff. Fear stabbed through Sarah. She locked eyes with William, seeing raw terror reflected there. In that moment, all bitterness faded, replaced by the realization that they both desperately wanted their child to be safe. The baby's heartbeat stabilized, and relief flowed. Hours crawled by. Finally, near dawn, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to push. Nurses coached her, encouraging her to bear down. She felt like every muscle in her body was on fire. William murmured supportive words, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. With a final guttural cry, she felt the release of pain and the sudden miraculous wail of new life. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squirming newborn. A rush of emotions seized Sarah. Love, relief, awe. She reached out trembling arms as they placed the baby on her chest. Shocked by the warmth of that tiny body, tears streamed down Sarah's face. William's eyes glistened too, a rare vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. "Welcome to the world," Sarah whispered, voice choked, pressing a kiss to the baby's wet forehead. The little girl quieted, opening her eyes for a brief second, as if trying to focus on her mother's face. Later they moved Sarah to a recovery room. William remained close, pacing the hallway, on calls to his legal team, but always returning to check on Sarah and the baby. He smiled whenever he saw them together, as though the world outside, with all its scandal and drama, had lost its power here. Barbara tried to visit, but Sarah requested only William and the medical staff be allowed in. She wasn't ready to confront her mother-in-law. Not yet. Meanwhile, word arrived that the scandal at Donovan Enterprises was being resolved. William had stepped forward, taking responsibility for corporate oversight lapses and cooperating with regulators. He was determined to repair the damage rather than hide. 2 days passed in the hospital, a whirlwind of feeding diaper changes and exhausted naps. Sarah watched William hold their daughter, marveling at how gently he cradled her. They hadn't formally picked a name. Sarah had half a dozen favorites. While gazing into her daughter's round, curious eyes, she decided on Hope. It felt fitting. This tiny baby was the embodiment of new beginnings. When discharge day came, William insisted on driving them to Sarah's apartment. He carefully carried the car seat, setting it up by the living room couch. Sarah gently unbuckled Hope, lifting her close. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet apartment, the hush broken only by soft baby sighs. "I want to make a pledge," William said, voice low. "To be here for you and Hope, always. I know I can't erase the past, but I swear I'll do everything in my power to make our future better." Sarah gazed at him, then at Hope. Her heart brimmed with a kaleidoscope of emotions: uncertainty, gratitude, a cautious desire to heal. "It won't be easy," she murmured. "We have a lot to work through, but I'd like to try." He exhaled relief, flooding his features. "We'll go at your pace. Whatever you need." She nodded, tears glimmering. Over his shoulder, she saw a reflection in the window herself, William and Hope in his arms, forming a fragile family portrait. Perhaps fate had brought them full circle. The child they created now bound them with a love that neither betrayal nor success could sever. For weeks they navigated those uncharted waters. William balanced corporate responsibilities with fatherhood, often losing track of time as he admired his sleeping daughter. Sarah slowly let her guard down, recognizing that while forgiveness would be a journey, she didn't have to walk it alone anymore. Each day, she felt stronger. Each day, baby Hope grew a reminder that life could emerge triumphant, even from heartbreak. Whether or not Sarah and William's relationship would fully mend remained to be seen. But for the first time, she believed in second chances. In a world as unpredictable as theirs, one truth shone clear: love, when nurtured, can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, from the frigid sidewalks of homelessness to the gentle warmth of a newfound family, Sarah and William's story shows that life rarely unfolds as expected, but hope can spark miracles. Their journey reminds us that every hardship carries the seed of possibility, and every broken bond can mend with genuine remorse, forgiveness, and perseverance. Thank you for joining me in this emotional roller coaster of heartache, redemption, and rebirth. If this story moved you, if you felt Sarah's struggles and found inspiration in her resilience, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support ensures we can continue creating dramatic, heartfelt stories that spark conversations and spread hope. Comment below. What part of Sarah and William's journey resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Together we celebrate love's power to heal no matter how broken the path once seemed. Eleanor Carter never imagined her life would spiral into a whirlwind of heartbreak, betrayal, and unspeakable survival. One fateful night, cast out on the cold, unforgiving streets, she found herself giving birth in an empty alley with no help in sight. Her millionaire ex-partner, Adrian Davenport, was nowhere to be found. Yet destiny had other plans. Months later they would come face to face again, but this time under the glaring lights of a courtroom, with the relentless echo of a judge's gavel thundering in the background. Prepare for an unforgettable journey entwined with secrets, scandals, and a relentless quest for justice that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Elena Carter had grown accustomed to the noises of the city, the taxi horns, distant sirens, and the electric hum of street lamps. But on this particular night, every sound felt amplified. The cold seeped through her tattered coat, chilling her to the bone. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her swollen belly. She stumbled through the dark alley, breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, searching for any sign of help. Her mind raced with a single, frantic question. Where is Adrian? He had promised to be there for her, to protect her and their unborn child. But as her due date approached, the phone calls stopped and the texts never came. The man who once swore his undying love vanished without a trace. At first, Elena believed he was busy handling the affairs of Davenport Holdings. Adrian was, after all, the youngest heir to a formidable business empire. He spent his days attending endless meetings at the family firm's head office in Chicago's Loop, dining with politicians and rubbing shoulders at exclusive galas. She brushed aside her doubts, clinging to the idea that once his work settled, he would return to her side. But here she was alone in labor and desperately hoping for a miracle. The contraction hit her with brutal force. Elena collapsed against a graffiti-covered wall, gritting her teeth so hard she feared they might crack. She had no phone. She had no one to call. She'd pawned her last valuable possession, her mother's locket, just to afford a few nights at a run-down motel. But now even that was gone. She looked up and down the deserted alley, praying someone might pass by. Her pleas were swallowed by the roar of an approaching train overhead. In that suffocating moment, Eleanor realized she would have to deliver her baby by herself. Panic seized her heart, but a fierce maternal instinct also flooded her veins. She forced herself to breathe, to remember the techniques she'd read about months ago. As another contraction racked her body, Eleanor screamed into the darkness. She felt the baby descending, a sensation both terrifying and miraculous. She removed her coat, spreading it on the cold, damp pavement. The city's neon glow illuminated the graffiti around her, and she felt for a fleeting second that this heart-breakingly surreal scene might be the end of her. But she pushed forward, determined to bring her child into the world, no matter the cost. A sudden wave of relief swept over Elena when she heard a faint voice from the mouth of the alley. An elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Harold James, wearing a threadbare trench coat, had heard her cries. Under normal circumstances, he might have hurried on, fearful of city dangers, but something compelled him to step forward. Crouching beside Elena, he offered nothing more than a few words of encouragement, and trembling hands he admitted he knew next to nothing about childbirth. But in that moment, compassion was all Eleanor needed. With Harold's help, she tore open the hem of her dress to fashion makeshift swaddling cloths. Every nerve in her body felt aflame. She let out a raw, guttural scream. And then finally a new voice joined the piercing cry of her newborn daughter. Elena cradled the tiny infant against her chest, tears mingling with the sweat on her face. Harold rummaged through his pockets, eventually producing a clean handkerchief to gently wipe the baby's face. In the faint glow of a flickering streetlight, Eleanor cast at her child a rush of love, overwhelming the pain and desperation. She whispered a single name: Hope. In the days that followed, Eleanor's world was a fragile balancing act between survival and caring for her newborn. Mr. James, true to his unassuming kindness, led Elena to a makeshift shelter hidden beneath the overpass. The shelter, run by a small non-profit, offered warmth and anonymity. Two things she desperately needed: She tried to contact Adrian, but the line she had for him was constantly busy or disconnected. When she called Davenport Holdings, she was met with polite yet dismissive secretaries who claimed they had never heard of her. During those sleepless nights while cradling hope close, Eleanor wondered what she had done to deserve such abandonment. And yet she clung to a slender thread of optimism. Adrian was a man of ambition, recognized as a wunderkind in the financial world, a graduate of Harvard Business School, a subject of numerous articles in Forbes and The Guardian. He was adored by the public for his philanthropic endeavors and charm. Elena reasoned that the man she knew, gentle caring, couldn't have simply disappeared on purpose. But as she discovered an outdated newspaper article featuring Adrian at the Ritz-Carlton Gala with another woman on his arm, her doubts exploded into heartbreak. Had he truly replaced her? Or was there something deeper at play? The shelter manager, Teresa Alvarez, took pity on Elena's plight. She reached out to local charities, including one run by the city's Department of Human Services, in hopes of securing more permanent assistance for Elena and her newborn. The endless forms and administrative hoops felt like navigating a labyrinth. But Elena's determination never wavered. Between feedings, Elena poured every ounce of energy she had into finding work. Most potential employers turned her away the moment they saw her baby in tow. A sympathetic waitress position offered by a local diner was short-lived when Hope developed colic, and Elena's frequent absences to soothe her daughter resulted in abrupt termination. At night, Eleanor often found herself awake, listening to the distant hum of late-night traffic, reliving the sweet memories with Adrian. She remembered the penthouse parties at the Drake Hotel, the spontaneous weekend trips to Napa Valley, and the times he used to whisper promises of a life filled with love and security. How could that same man leave her to fend for herself in the cold streets of Chicago? Desperation fueled her. She wrote letters addressed directly to Adrian's personal penthouse, even slipping one under the doors of Davenport Holdings. Silence remained her only reply. Behind the walls of Davenport Holdings, Adrian's world was equally tumultuous, though in a very different way. After his father's sudden passing from a heart attack, Adrian found himself in the crosshairs of board members, executives, and opportunistic relatives who all questioned whether he had the mettle to steer the Davenport empire. He spent long nights buried in financial reports, ironically unaware that just a few miles away, Eleanor was fighting to keep their newborn daughter fed and warm. Whenever thoughts of Elena surfaced, her radiant smile, her unwavering belief in him, he tried to dismiss them. The memory of their argument, the hurt on her face as he walked out the door, weighed heavily on him. Yet he convinced himself he was doing the right thing by focusing on the business. Meanwhile, Adrian's best friend and personal attorney, Mark Henderson, cautioned him repeatedly. "If Eleanor is pregnant, you need to address it," Mark insisted. Ignoring the possibility could lead to legal trouble down the road. But Adrian, grappling with his own insecurities and illusions of betrayal, brushed aside his friend's concerns. With the entire Davenport board pressuring him to secure a profitable merger, Adrian allowed his personal life to remain an unresolved mystery. Winter arrived mercilessly in Chicago, the sub-zero winds cutting across Lake Michigan and leaving ice crystals in their wake. For Elena and her baby, warmth was a luxury they could seldom afford. Through the non-profit's coordination, they secured a small room in a halfway house. The cramped space, flaking walls, and drafty windows were far from ideal, but Elena found a glimmer of hope in having a door to lock at night. Every morning she dressed Hope in layers of donated clothes before braving the frigid streets to search for work. She handed out resumes at fast food chains, retail stores, and even administrative offices. Most places either ignored her or expressed sympathy before showing her the door. "We'll keep your application on file," they'd say, their eyes betraying a pity she loathed. One fateful day, after trudging through a blizzard, Eleanor collapsed on the sidewalk, her body shaking from exhaustion. A passerby named Patricia Locke, an off-duty social worker, found her and immediately called an ambulance. At Mount Sinai Hospital, doctors discovered severe anemia, dehydration, and signs of malnourishment. For Elena, the hospital bed and the gentle hum of machines offered a fleeting sense of safety, even if Hope's cries in the nursery reminded her that they still had an uphill battle to fight. While Elena recovered at Mount Sinai, Patricia Locke, the caring social worker who found her, visited every day. She brought small comforts, a cozy blanket for Hope, a set of baby bottles, and offered a compassionate ear. It was Patricia who first gently suggested legal counsel. "Eleanor," Patricia said one afternoon, "you have rights, and so does your daughter. If Adrian Davenport is truly the father, you need to consider seeking child support or any financial help the law might provide." The mention of Adrian's name triggered a wave of conflicting emotions in Eleanor: anger, sorrow, and a glimmer of lingering love. She had been too proud, or perhaps too frightened, to consider legal action before. The mere idea of dragging her once-beloved partner into court felt like another betrayal of her hopes for a reconciled family. But she had to face the reality her baby needed stability, and she was running out of ways to provide it alone. By the time Elena was discharged, Patricia had connected her with a pro bono legal clinic. There, Elena was introduced to Marcia Bradshaw, a determined young attorney with kind eyes who specialized in family law. And with that single step, the trajectory of Elena's world began to shift. Marcia Bradshaw's office was modest, nestled in a worn-out building housing various non-profits. Unlike the gleaming high-rises of Davenport Holdings, the space here was cramped and the elevator often broken. But Elena immediately felt at ease. There was an air of sincerity in Marcia's posture as she gestured for Elena to sit. As Elena recounted her story, Marcia listened intently, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The attorney's brow furrowed when Elena described giving birth alone in an alley, and the subsequent silence from Adrian. "If Adrian Davenport is the father," Marcia said carefully, "we can pursue a paternity test, child support, and potentially more. But you must be prepared for a fight. The Davenports are powerful, and they're not going to roll out a welcome mat." Fear and resolve wrestled within Elena. She cradled hope as the baby fussed her cries, echoing through the cramped room. Elena knew she was venturing into uncharted territory, a world of court documents and depositions, but she no longer had the luxury of choice. Leaving Marcia's office, Elena felt a rush of anxious determination. The protective walls she'd tried to build around her heartbreak were slowly giving way to a new resolve. "I will fight for my daughter's future." The day the official letter arrived at Davenport Holdings was one Adrian would never forget. The engraved envelope bore Marcia Bradshaw's name and the words "Notice of Paternity and Child Support Hearing." Adrian stared at the letter, his mind racing, heart pounding as he read through the legal jargon. He felt a maelstrom of emotions: anger at the sudden intrusion into his carefully curated life, guilt for having let things spiral so far, and a strange flicker of relief that at last the question of Elena would be addressed. He remembered how he once imagined proposing to her on a yacht in the Adriatic Sea, how he had envisioned a future of laughter and children running around an estate in Lake Forest. That dream had evaporated into thin air, replaced by board meetings and silent phone calls. Mark Henderson, Adrian's attorney and friend read the document over his shoulder. "You need to deal with this carefully," Mark warned. "If the test proves the child is yours, you can't ignore it. Not legally, not morally." Without responding, Adrian set the letter aside, fists clenched. He felt cornered and betrayed, yet he couldn't deny an inexplicable ache in his chest. A child. His child. That realization would change everything. Elena's first court hearing was scheduled at the Cook County Circuit Court. The antique architecture of the courthouse, with its towering pillars and hushed halls, made her feel both insignificant and strangely hopeful. She clutched hope tightly, trying to focus on the rhythmic breathing of her baby, rather than the hammering of her own heart. Anxiety pinned her to her seat in the waiting area. She wasn't dressed in designer clothing or accompanied by a legal entourage. All she had was Marcia by her side. She couldn't help but recall the glittering galas she had once attended with Adrian. It seemed surreal that she was now about to face him in a courtroom. When Adrian finally arrived, Elena felt her breath hitch. He looked every bit the polished millionaire tailored suit, polished shoes, cool confidence. Yet in his eyes, she glimpsed a flicker of something that looked a lot like regret. The hearing was brief. Judge Isaac Moretti, known for his stern demeanor, listened attentively as Marcia outlined the need for an immediate paternity test. Adrian's legal team, led by a seasoned lawyer named Robert King, tried to dismiss the case as a baseless claim. But Judge Moretti ordered the test without hesitation, setting in motion the legal machinery that would forever link their fates. The paternity test results came back positive. Adrian Davenport was indeed Hope's father. The news spread through the corridors of Davenport Holdings like wildfire, fueling office gossip and shaking the family's pristine image. Adrian's stepmother, Lucinda Davenport, practically frothed at the mouth with indignation, convinced Elena was nothing more than a cunning gold digger. Behind closed doors, Adrian's board of directors were not pleased either. The timing could not have been worse. Davenport Holdings was on the cusp of closing a multi-million-dollar deal with Morgan Stanley, and shareholders feared negative press might jeopardize the negotiations. Whispers of damage control echoed in the executive suites, while social media buzzed with rumors, speculation, and paparazzi snapshots. For Elena, the test result was a bittersweet vindication. She had never doubted who Hope's father was, but seeing the official paperwork gave her a momentary surge of courage. Marcia assured her that the next steps formalizing child support, possibly negotiating custody rights, were well within her legal claims. Still, a pang of sadness clung to her. Despite her anger and hurt, a small part of her had yearned for an apology or some show of remorse from Adrian that went beyond mere legal obligation. But for now, the fight had only just begun, as the public eye turned toward the unfolding drama media outlets, scrambled for angles. The Chicago Tribune ran a headline, "Millionaire heir, Adrian Davenport, in paternity scandal." Talk shows, tabloid websites, and social media hashtags proliferated. Meanwhile, Elena found herself fending off reporters who camped outside the shelter, where she sometimes volunteered, eager to snap pictures of her with Hope. Marcia advised Elena to maintain privacy and focus on the court proceedings, but the relentless intrusion weighed on her. She worried about how the press would frame her story. She was not a schemer, nor was she some naive girl chasing a wealthy man's fortune. She was simply a mother, fighting for her child's rightful support. Adrian, on the other hand, had spun into a crisis management frenzy. Robert King arranged a discreet meeting with Marcia to to gauge the possibility of settling out of court. They proposed a lump sum of money in exchange for full custody, hoping to shield the Davenport name from ongoing scandal. Eleanor was appalled by the suggestion that she might sell her child to a father who had been absent throughout her pregnancy and her daughter's early months. For Elena, the lines were clear. She wanted Adrian to be involved in Hope's life, but not at the cost of being pushed aside like an inconvenience. A crucial turning point arrived when Marcia scheduled a mediation session. The goal was to see if a compromise could be reached without dragging the matter through a drawn-out trial. The sterile conference room in the courthouse felt suffocating, its white walls echoing even the slightest shuffle of papers. Eleanor sat on one side with Marcia. Adrian, flanked by Robert King, occupied the other. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Linda Moore, explained the process. "We're here to see if there's a middle ground," she said, her gentle tone attempting to melt the icy tension. Elena expected Adrian to open with a tirade or an accusation. Instead, he surprised her. I never meant for it to get to this," he began haltingly. I thought you'd moved on. I didn't know you were homeless or struggling. If I had known He trailed off, his eyes flickering with guilt. For a second, Eleanor felt her heart soften. She recalled the tenderness he once showed her, the man who never hesitated to hold her hand in public, who spoke of building a family someday. But then she remembered the labor pains, the cold alley, and the desperate nights. That memory hardened her resolve. A real apology wasn't enough. She needed a sincere commitment to her and Hope's well-being. The mediation session ended without a resolution. Adrian insisted he wanted to be part of Hope's life, but Robert King recommended that Elena relinquish physical custody in exchange for generous financial compensation. Elena stood firm, refusing to let Adrian come and go at will, without shouldering true parental responsibility. Outside the courthouse, media photographers snapped pictures capturing the tension etched on Elena's face and the discomfort in Adrian's posture. Headlines spun wildly: heirs, love child, sparks. Heated custody battle. Mother of Davenport. Baby rejects lavish settlement. Elena returned to her cramped room that night, emotionally drained. Though she believed she was making the right choices for Hope, fear gnawed at her. She worried about the financial might of the Davenport family, their ability to drag her through an endless legal process. Would she be forced into a settlement just to keep her daughter secure? After putting Hope to sleep, Elena found a quiet moment to look through old photographs. She remembered happier days, times when Adrian would spin her around the living room while jazz music played in the background. Those memories felt like a lifetime ago. Resolute and exhausted, she reminded herself of the life she wanted to build for her daughter, a life free from fear and uncertainty. Tension soared as the custody hearing approached. Judge Moretti had ordered a child services evaluation to assess both parents' living conditions and emotional capacity to care for Hope. A social worker named Clara Nolan visited Elena's humble accommodations, noting the cleanliness and the bond between mother and child, despite the limited resources. A week later, Clara arrived at Adrian's penthouse, located in a prestigious building overlooking Lake Michigan. The interior was immaculate, polished marble floors, high ceilings, and unobstructed view of the city skyline. But as Clara carefully asked Adrian questions about his role as a father, his responses seemed practiced as if guided by legal coaching. Behind the scenes, Adrian struggled. On one hand, he genuinely wanted to connect with the daughter he'd only just discovered. On the other, he felt immense pressure from his family and corporate obligations. There were times he'd slip away to his private office, gazing at the paternity test results, and wondering what kind of father he could be if he barely knew how to slow down. When Clara concluded her visits, she prepared a thorough report for the court, one that would weigh heavily in determining custody arrangements. Both Elena and Adrian braced themselves, not knowing which way the scales of justice would tip. The morning of the custody hearing dawned grey and chilly, reflecting the mood that enveloped the courthouse. Journalists lined the entrance cameras, flashing with relentless curiosity. Elena felt faint, her stomach churning from a mix of nerves and residual hunger. She'd skipped breakfast, having lost her appetite. In the courtroom, Judge Moretti wasted no time. Clara Nolan's report highlighted that while Adrian could offer financial stability and a luxurious environment, he had yet to demonstrate any hands-on parenting skills. Elena, on the other hand, had been the sole caregiver, albeit in impoverished circumstances, showing unwavering devotion to the child's welfare. Marcia argued passionately that Hope deserved not just money, but emotional security. She insisted that uprooting the infant from her mother's care would be traumatic. Robert King countered, emphasizing Adrian's resources and willingness to employ the best nannies, tutors, and medical specialists. He framed it as an opportunity for Hope to flourish in ways that Elena could never provide. Judge Moretti listened carefully, his face unreadable. After hours of testimony and legal arguments, he announced that he would take the matter under advisement. The final decision would be pronounced in a week's time. Eleanor exited the courtroom with her heart pounding, wondering if she would lose the only family she had left. As the days ticked by, Elena found herself swinging between fragile hope and crushing dread. The media coverage intensified, and she even discovered online forums where people debated her life like a soap opera, some branding her a gold digger, others calling Adrian a deadbeat father. Adrian retreated into isolation. He cancelled public appearances, delegated board responsibilities, and spent long hours alone in his penthouse. Each evening, he replayed memories of Elena in his mind, the warmth of her laughter, the strength she possessed even in adversity. Guilt coiled within him, especially when he thought about how he'd cut her off without an explanation. One evening, rummaging through old photo albums, Adrian stumbled upon a note Eleanor had once slipped into his briefcase, a small letter filled with her dreams for their future. Her handwriting read, "I believe in you. I believe in us." Adrian felt tears sting his eyes. He realized, perhaps too late, that his misguided attempts to shield his inheritance and reputation had cost him the one person who believed in his better self. With renewed determination, Adrian picked up the phone and dialed Mark Henderson's number. "I want to make this right," he said quietly, feeling the weight of each syllable. "Tell me how." The next day, Marcia's phone rang. On the line was Mark Henderson proposing a private meeting between Adrian and Eleanor without the glare of the media or the influence of attorneys. Marcia hesitated, but eventually agreed, sensing that dialogue might bridge the chasm between them. Elena was skeptical. She didn't want another meeting where Adrian's lawyer waved large checks in her face. But Marcia convinced her that maybe, just maybe, Adrian had finally seen the light. So on a chilly Friday evening, under the discreet arrangement of Mark and Marcia, Eleanor took a taxi to a small cafe in an unassuming part of town. Adrian was already waiting, hunched over a table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He stood up the moment Elena entered, his eyes immediately darting to the infant carrier in her arms. Hope was asleep, her tiny nose peeking out from beneath a knitted pink hat. For a tense moment, neither spoke. Then in a hushed tone, Adrian broke the silence. "She's beautiful." He hesitantly reached out, brushing a gentle fingertip across Hope's tiny hand. Elena's heart constricted. In that moment, she saw not the millionaire heir, but a father astonished by his child. They sat down, words tumbling out hesitantly at first, but soon flowing. Apologies, regrets, confessions of fear and pride. Outside the wind howled, but inside that modest cafe, a fragile truce began to form. Elena left the cafe feeling as if she had just stepped off a roller coaster. She and Adrian had talked for hours about the lost months, her homelessness, the labor in an alley, his blind ambition, and the manipulative counsel of those around him. Despite her lingering anger, she couldn't deny that Adrian seemed genuine in his remorse, his eyes brimming with emotion whenever Hope made a tiny, cooing sound. Though no concrete agreement was forged, they had taken a step closer to understanding. Adrian promised Elena that he would no longer hide behind the corporate fortress. If the court granted joint custody, he vowed to be a present father to ensure that Hope knew he loved her. That night, Elena returned to the shelter with Hope asleep in her arms. She felt conflicted. Her brain still cautioned her not to let her guard down, reminding her of the heartbreak she'd endured. Yet her heart yearned to believe that Adrian could be the partner and father he once promised to be. A new thought nestled into her mind. Perhaps the best scenario for Hope would be a cooperative relationship. But cooperation required trust, and trust was something they'd both shattered. For now, all she could do was wait for the court's ruling and see if Adrian's actions matched his words. On the day of the final custody decision, the tension within the courtroom was palpable. Lawyers stood at their respective tables, thick files and documents stacked high. Photographers waited outside, hungry for a shot that could capture victory or defeat. Judge Moretti took his seat, scanning the room before beginning. In the matter of Davenport versus Carter, regarding custody of the minor. Hope Carter, I have reviewed the Child Services report, listened to both parties and considered the best interest of the child. His voice resonated with authority. Elena clenched her hands tightly. Marcia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Adrian sat across from them, posture rigid. The judge explained that Hope deserved the love and care of both parents, provided each demonstrated fitness and genuine commitment. To that end, Judge Moretti continued, I am granting joint legal custody to both parties. Physical custody will remain primarily with Ms. Carter, given her demonstrated role as the primary caregiver. Mr. Davenport is granted visitation rights with a review scheduled in 6 months to determine if expanded custody is appropriate. Eleanor felt a surge of relief wash over her, tears pooling in her eyes. Adrian exhaled sharply, a complex mix of relief and resolve settling over him. The gavel's echo signaled a new chapter in their unfolding saga. In the days that followed the court's decision, Adrian took immediate steps to prove his commitment. He arranged for a modest but comfortable apartment for Eleanor and Hope, covering the lease so they no longer had to rely on the cramped quarters of the shelter. Initially, Elena resisted. She worried that accepting Adrian's help would become a new chain binding her to his will. But Marcia gently counseled that stable housing was essential for Hope's well-being, and Elena begrudgingly accepted. Still, she set boundaries. She refused to accept a personal driver or a credit card. I want to stand on my own feet, she insisted. Adrian respected that choice, albeit with lingering concern. For Adrian, transitioning into fatherhood was humbling and at times awkward. He'd show up on weekends with groceries, baby toys, and books he was reading on how to care for infants. He took to heart every detail Elena offered, how to hold Hope correctly, how to burp her, how to recognize her different cries. Bit by bit, he caught glimpses of the daily struggles Elena endured, the midnight feedings, the diapers, the constant worry over money. With each late-night bottle he prepared, and each lullaby he learned, Adrian felt a foreign yet comforting sense of purpose awakening in him. As Hope reached 6 months old, her giggles and coos transformed the once quiet apartment into a place of joy and promise. Elena found part-time work at a local community center, helping to organize charity drives for families in need, a role that resonated deeply with her recent experiences. With Adrian's financial support for childcare, she could finally balance work and motherhood. Their co-parenting arrangement wasn't without its challenges. Adrian's demanding schedule sometimes caused him to miss scheduled visits, igniting Elena's frustration. In turn, Elena's pride often made it difficult to accept gifts or assistance beyond the bare minimum. They argued occasionally, old wounds and mistrust surfacing at the worst moments. Yet amid the strain, a growing sense of mutual respect emerged. Adrian discovered that being a father wasn't just about providing resources. It was about being present, listening to the stories of Hope's milestones, her first attempt at crawling her discovery of how to clap her hands with delight. Elena learned that she could lean on someone else without forfeiting her independence or identity. Slowly but steadily, they formed a tentative partnership focused on Hope's happiness, and in fleeting moments, they caught themselves smiling at each other, recalling a lost tenderness that once bound them together. Just when things seemed to be reaching a fragile equilibrium, fate threw another curveball. A letter arrived from the Davenport family's legal team, informing Adrian that his extended family intended to challenge his ability to lead Davenport Holdings. Rumors of scandal and poor judgment swirled among board members. The story of Adrian's love child had dampened investor confidence, and certain factions within the company wanted him removed as CEO before the upcoming annual shareholder meeting. Adrian felt torn. The pressure from the board forced him into endless strategy sessions, leaving him little time for his newly formed paternal duties. Stress and sleepless nights once again plagued him. Only this time, the thought of losing his daughter's blossoming trust felt more terrifying than losing the company. Elena noticed Adrian's sudden absences, the unread texts, the last-minute cancellations. Old anxieties gnawed at her. Was he pulling away again when life became too complicated? But one night, Adrian showed up at the apartment unannounced, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "they're trying to oust me from the company. If I lose my position, I lose my standing, and with that I might lose credibility in court if custody is revisited." In that moment, Eleanor saw past his polished exterior to the vulnerable man she once loved. She felt a rush of sympathy, remembering her own struggles for survival. They were both fighting battles, each in a different arena, but connected by the same driving force, Hope's future. Determined not to let external forces tear them apart, Adrian and Elena found themselves working together in an unexpected way. While Adrian battled board politics, Elena, in her own quiet manner, stepped forward to defend him publicly. She gave a small interview to a local reporter, someone she trusted from her volunteer work, clarifying that Adrian was not the villain that tabloids painted him to be. "I won't deny our history is complicated," Elena said, cradling Hope on her lap during the interview. "But Adrian Davenport has been stepping up as a father. He's learning, he's trying, and that means more to me than his net worth ever could." The interview went viral, eliciting mixed reactions. Some cynics claimed Elena had been bought off, while others admired her honesty. Yet the simple act of standing up for Adrian resonated with key investors who saw a different side of him. A man willing to own his mistakes and grow from them. As the annual shareholder meeting approached, the tension mounted. Adrian prepared presentations, gathered supportive statements, and readied a contingency plan if all else failed. At the same time, Elena braced herself for the possibility that the stability they'd just begun to enjoy might come crashing down should Adrian lose control of Davenport Holdings. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived with all the drama of a high-stakes showdown. The boardroom at Davenport Holdings was buzzing with tension. Rows of leather chairs faced a large screen, displaying financial graphs and corporate forecasts. Major investors from across the globe dialed in via video conference. Adrian presented his case, a transparent look at Davenport Holdings' performance under his leadership growth metrics and future plans. His voice was calm but firm, addressing controversies head-on. He even touched upon the paternity case, emphasizing that while the media had sensationalized his personal life, it had not impacted the company's profitability or strategic vision. Then, one by one, board members asked questions, some supportive, others accusatory. Lucinda Davenport. His stepmother led the charge to remove him, claiming he lacked the moral fiber to represent the company. Adrian countered calmly, reminding everyone that personal matters should not outweigh professional competence. In a surprising twist, Mark Henderson, Adrian's personal attorney, stood to share statements from philanthropic organizations praising Adrian's renewed commitment to social causes, some of which Elena had encouraged him to support. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. By the time the final vote was taken, it was announced that Adrian would retain his position as CEO, winning by a narrow margin. Relief washed over him, but as he walked out of the boardroom, he knew this was only one victory in a much larger battle for redemption. That evening, Adrian arrived at Elena's apartment with a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flower. While the gesture was simple, it was the first time in months he'd shown up for a reason other than fatherly duties or crisis management. Elena welcomed him inside, noticing the weariness etched on his face. They sat in the small living room, the sound of Hope's lullaby machine humming softly from the bedroom. Adrian recounted the day's events, the tension, the accusations, the final vote. Elena listened, relieved that he'd managed to hold on to his leadership role. In the quiet that followed, she found herself reminiscing aloud about their early days, the time they tried tandem skydiving in Nevada, the quiet mornings, sipping coffee on his penthouse balcony, how he would whisper jokes just to make her laugh. Adrian smiled sadly, acknowledging how far they had strayed from those moments. A flicker of vulnerability passed between them. For Elena, it was both comforting and unsettling. She realized they were no longer the starry-eyed couple they once were. Too many harsh realities had tested their bond. Yet in that fleeting moment, the possibility of forging a new relationship built on honesty and shared responsibility didn't seem so impossible. Over the following weeks, Adrian gradually transitioned into a more present, engaged father. No longer buried beneath the avalanche of corporate obligations, he restructured his schedule, hiring trusted deputies to manage the day-to-day operations of Davenport Holdings. That decision gave him something money couldn't buy: time. And he poured that time into being with Hope. He arrived early on weekends, often surprising Elena with breakfast in hand, usually slightly cold, but the thought warmed her. Together they experienced milestones that most parents took for granted. Adrian was there when Hope giggled uncontrollably at her first bubble bath, and when she tried to crawl only to topple face first onto a plush rug. He laughed, cheered, and even cried when Hope uttered her first word. Mama Eleanor teased him for pouting, but secretly she was touched by how deeply he cared. The community center where Elena worked was preparing for its biggest event, yet a charity gala supporting homeless mothers and children. It was a cause deeply personal to her, and she'd spent months helping to organize every detail. Nervously, She handed Adrian an invitation one evening. "You don't have to come," she said quickly. "It's small. Nothing like the Davenport Foundation galas you're used to." Adrian studied the invitation. "Elena, if this matters to you, it matters to me." He insisted on donating, but she was firm. "Do it anonymously. I don't want anyone to think I'm parading you around for donations." He smiled. "Then I'll show up and clap the loudest when you take the mic." At the gala, Elena wore a simple yet elegant navy blue dress borrowed from the center's donation wardrobe. She moved gracefully between guests, sharing her story without embellishing the tragedy or martyring herself. Sometimes life breaks you open so that light can get in. She told one donor eyes, briefly glancing toward Hope, sleeping in her stroller nearby. Adrian, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched her in awe. The woman he once saw only through the lens of romance had transformed into something even more formidable. An advocate, a leader, a survivor. After her speech, which ended with a standing ovation, Eleanor found Adrian waiting for her in the hallway, holding 2 cups of punch and looking slightly overwhelmed. "You were incredible," he said. "Honestly, I've never been prouder." Elena looked at him, unsure how to respond. So much had passed between them. Betrayal, distance, hardship. But in that moment, she saw none of it. She saw a man, slowly shedding his armor, trying to rebuild what he had once destroyed. Later that night after the event, as they sat on Elena's couch, while Hope slept soundly in her crib, they spoke of dreams not just for their daughter, but for themselves. Not the extravagant kind from their past, but quiet, meaningful ones, starting a literacy program at the center, traveling someday with Hope, maybe even writing a children's book together. Though the future remained uncertain, the bond between them deepened, forged not through romance but resilience. And from that place, something new began to bloom. One crisp autumn afternoon, golden leaves spiraled down from the trees as Adrian took Elena and Hope on a quiet outing to the Chicago Botanic Garden. The air carried the faint scent of pine and earth, and laughter floated on the breeze from nearby families enjoying the rare sunny day. Hope, now full of energy and curiosity, sat in her stroller wide-eyed at every fluttering leaf and blooming petal, pointing and babbling in delight. Adrian pushed the stroller gently while Elena walked beside him. Their steps unhurried for the first time in a long while. The sunlight glinted through the trees, casting shifting patterns on the path. It felt almost surreal after all the months of legal battles, sleepless nights and heartbreak, to be here in a moment so peaceful and undisturbed. They paused near a small pond where ducks drifted lazily across the surface. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few breadcrumbs he'd brought along. "Let's give her her first duck-feeding memory," he said, smiling as he handed a few crumbs to Elena and crouched beside Hope. The little girl squealed with glee as Adrian helped her toss them into the water. When they found a shaded bench beneath a tall oak tree, Elena sat down and leaned back, watching as Adrian continued to entertain Hope with silly faces and animated animal sounds. The bond between them had grown stronger, unmistakably genuine. Elena couldn't deny how far Adrian had come, not just in court appearances or financial responsibility, but in the daily unglamorous moments of fatherhood. Adrian eventually joined her on the bench, sitting close, but careful not to presume too much. There was a long silence before he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes fixed on Hope, playing with a leaf in her tiny hands. "About everything. How far we've come, and how far I still need to go." Elena turned her head toward him, listening intently. I know I can't rewrite the past, he continued. But I want to build something better for her, for us. I'm not talking about a perfect family wrapped in a bow. I know we're not there. But maybe we could try again. Not just as co-parents, but as something more. Elena felt her breath catch slightly. She looked down at their intertwined hands, remembering every low point, the alley, the courtroom, the nights when she doubted she could survive. And yet here he was, not the arrogant millionaire she had once feared, but a man learning to love with humility and care. I don't have an answer right now, she said softly, brushing a wind-blown curl from her face. But I'm willing to keep walking forward with you, one step at a time. Adrian nodded slowly, clearly moved. That's all I could hope for. As the sun dipped lower and the shadows lengthened, the three of them sat in quiet harmony, watching the ducks glide across the pond. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. It was healing, and it was theirs. 3 months later, the sharp bite of winter had returned, but Elena Carter no longer feared the cold. She stood inside a modest but warm townhouse, nestled on a quiet street in Evanston, a far cry from the shelter beds and crumbling walls of her past. The house was part of a new chapter she and Adrian had begun, one rooted not in old promises, but in careful progress. They had agreed to co-parent under one roof, not as lovers, but as partners in raising their daughter. Separate bedrooms, separate routines, but shared goals and growing respect. Hope toddled across the hardwood floor in mismatched socks, giggling as she clutched her favorite stuffed bear. Adrian sat cross-legged nearby, trying to baby-proof the bookshelf with instructions that might as well have been written in Greek. "These screws are evil," he muttered, prompting a laugh from Elena as she walked in with 2 mugs of tea. They still clashed now and then over money, over chores, over what constituted a suitable bedtime snack. But unlike before, they had learned how to listen. Arguments no longer escalated into cold silences. Instead, they ended with open conversations and quiet apologies. It was messy, imperfect, and very human. Their evenings had taken on a quiet rhythm. After Hope's bath, they'd gather in the small living room, with warm blankets and board books. Adrian had developed a flair for dramatic bedtime readings, complete with voices and sound effects that left Hope squealing with joy, and Elena smiling in spite of herself. When Hope was finally tucked into bed, the adults often lingered, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the silence that comes after a day well lived. One night, as snow flurries drifted past the window, Elena turned to Adrian and shared a new idea she'd been working on, expanding the community center's outreach to include legal aid and early childhood support. Adrian, genuinely impressed, offered to connect her with some of his philanthropic contacts, not as a favor, but as a collaborator. "You're building something powerful, Elena," he said. "It deserves the spotlight." "And you," she asked, "what are you building now?" He hesitated. "I think I'm learning how to build a life, not just a legacy. Something real. Something that doesn't disappear when the cameras turn off." They exchanged a long glance full of unspoken understanding. There was no rush to define what they were neither fully reconciled nor completely apart. What mattered was the space they'd created, one of safety, of effort, of love, expressed in small daily acts. Elena often thought back to that night in the alley, shivering, terrified, alone. It had marked the beginning of the hardest chapter in her life, but it had also led her here, to warmth, to healing, to possibility. As Hope stirred softly in her crib, her tiny breaths echoing through the baby monitor, Elena whispered into the quiet, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. Their journey had been anything but easy, from betrayal to legal showdowns, from lonely nights on city streets to the glaring lights of a courtroom. Yet somewhere along the way, Eleanor Carter and Adrian Davenport found a fragile strength they never knew they possessed. Through bitter truths and hard-fought compromises, they discovered that genuine love goes beyond a lavish bank account or an ironclad legal contract. It's built on presence, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to giving Hope the life she deserves. As their story continues to unfold, one truth remains clear. No matter how rocky the path, redemption and new beginnings are always possible with courage and determination. If you found inspiration or solace in this tale of resilience and the power of a parent's love, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that touch the heart and awaken hope. Thank you for watching.